You're listening to Reach, Teach, Talk with Nat Davey.
Welcome to another episode of Reach, Teach, Talk. I am excited today because my guest is Jimi Slattery, who is the head of Compassion Matters, which is an organization based in Oxford, in the UK, here in the UK. And he's going to talk with us today about the importance of compassion, particularly with the youngest generation. In other words, the students that we are teaching here and now today. And I just got to be honest, Jimi, I'm actually exhausted right now. I just got back from 3 weeks of work in the U.S. and I'm jet lagged. I find the older I get, the more sensitive I am to jet lag, and so I've been kind of mainlining the coffee a bit, which I don't drink much coffee in my regular life, but I definitely am drinking more today just to make it through. But also, just I'm noticing the effect that fatigue has on my temper, my mood, and I promise I'll play well today with you. But honestly, like I'm feeling the effects of fatigue on my overall mood, and I'm thinking about how I notice even today, like I'm talking more curtly with people. I'm not noticing the people around me as much because I'm just focused on getting through the day, and I'm also just feeling tired. And it was apt because we're talking today about compassion, and as you know, an educator myself, I think about the importance of being rested and the importance of time to self-care. In other words, to take care of myself before, as a teacher, to take care of myself so that then I can be of best service to my students. And being of best service to my students really means being as compassionate as it can be, understanding that there's 25 individuals right there in the classroom sharing the space with me, all different learning abilities, all different personalities, all different, just colors, fabric, right, that make up the quilt of the classroom. But really I found that for me to best connect with them, I needed to connect with myself and practice self-compassion as well as so that I could therefore practice compassion toward them. So having you here today, when I'm in this kind of low, low on the fuel gauge mindset, is really perfect, because you're here to talk with me today about the importance of compassion and to share with our viewers and our listeners why compassion is important as a skill to be learned. I'll let you phrase it however you wish, but why it's so important for the youngest ones today to be quite versed in the importance of compassion, what compassion is, the definition of compassion, and obviously the practice of it. In other words, why compassion matters, which coincidentally is the name of your organization, Compassion Matters. So, Jimi, I'll have you take it away from there.
Well, I don't think you should be too hard on yourself, because you're noticing, for one, and you're being mindful about the fact and your mood, which I think is a really great thing. So you're being considerate in yourself anyway, and your actions towards others, which is really important. I think the real danger is when we're really blinkered and our emotions overtake our ability to notice where we are and what we're feeling like and how we're acting. That's the space where you begin to kind of act in sometimes a quite harmful way towards yourself and others emotionally. So you shouldn't be too hard on yourself.
Thank you. But I accept your forgiveness. But you're right, the idea of being blinded by emotion, right? Typically, that blinded by rage, blinded by anger, blinded by one's temper. That's what you're referring to?
Yeah, and I think the classroom, kind of bringing it back to education, the classroom is a space where that happens a lot. Because, as you've just described, it's a space with so many people with so many different moods who are on different levels and who are trying to negotiate their way through just that time, maybe that 45 minutes an hour, and then there's you, the teacher at the front, trying to kind of keep those plates spinning and keep everyone on course. It's an incredible dynamic. There's a lot going on emotionally in that room. And so for me, I think a focus on compassion a lot of the time is about taking ourselves, as well as being kind to ourselves, taking ourselves out and thinking about others. And that can be a real way of leveling that dynamic, because if you're thinking about others as well as on an equal footing, or sometimes more than yourself, you begin to see a dynamic which is slightly more steady, I suppose. And I think there's, in the classrooms I've seen where this has been really taken on board, there seems to be a kind of peacefulness, a social cohesion, and steadiness, I suppose, which it just creates a space for learning, which is more productive. It allows people to flourish in that environment more, which is why I'm interested in this actually. I think the world should be a more compassionate place generally, and I think we're in a time in our kind of modern society where compassion is lacking. And I think the amazing thing about my job is people do come up to me and they go, yeah, compassion does matter and we need more of it. And it's an easy, it's what I do is an easy pitch, but when you start to pick away at it, it has some really quite incredible consequences. When we lack compassion, we lack engagement with other people, we lack respect for ourselves, and that has all sorts of knock-on effects at both a micro and a macro level. And in the macro level often being something political, and on the micro level our well-being being tested and sometimes negatively impacted by
You said something interesting earlier about how a lack of compassion, when somebody's feeling lack of compassion, they are actually feeling, what was the word you said about themselves? Angry about themselves, or there's a connection to a negativity in oneself?
Yeah, I mean, my colleague Alex, you said you used the phrase self-compassion, and he's an ethicist, and he would say that's wrong, because compassion is actually about recognizing suffering in others and then taking action. But I'm not as much as a pedant as Alex, so I think self-compassion is fine. I think it's a lovely term actually, and I think it recognizes that we need to take care of ourselves as well as others. Actually, we can only begin to take care of others if we're in a good, in a place of safety, in a place where we're feeling content and we've got everything set up on our side. Then that's the only way we can begin to make a positive impact on others. And the funny thing is, it's quite cyclical. So when you begin to engage others in compassion, your outward compassion, your inward happiness is impacted by that, and all of those positive things internally start to be impacted. And I suppose that's one of the really key things of our project, is that we're trying to show children and teachers that by looking outwards to others and by being of service to others and by thinking about others in a deeper way, we can begin to form happiness in ourselves. Service is not just about having a short-term gratification for doing something good. There's lots of things, lots of things that have been proven scientifically going on in our minds, which bring positiveness into our lives and happiness and flourishing into our lives through engaging with others in a positive way and trying to alleviate their suffering, and then has a knock-on effect on wider society. Each of those tiny interactions, each of those tiny efforts to alleviate suffering in others, it's good for us, but it's also good for the little connections and that person going out and doing it, and then another person going out and doing it. Yeah, it's powerful.
I'm thinking about how powerful it's been for me. I've lived in London for 4 years, and over the past 4 years, among other things, the UK has taken a real focus on mental health, and particularly among men. There's been football players who have talked about how important it is to actually loosen up your upper lip and to talk, because traditionally men don't talk, right? And this idea of connection versus this idea of being alone, to wallow alone, to think you can work through your problems on your own is really quite an impossible, a foolish errand, right? Because it really does. Science proves that this exchange of communication is really helpful toward one's own mental health, right? Mental stability. And I'm bringing that up because what you said earlier about the act of giving toward others as a compassionate act, as something that actually can be very healing for the person doing the giving. Maybe you could dive a little deeper into that, and then I'm going to ask another question that deals with the classroom and how that applies to the classroom.
Yeah, so there's been, I can't cite anyone, well, say it, but there's been a huge, the research around the way that compassionate action can influence both our kind of mental state and actually our kind of physical state has kind of been rapidly evolving over the last 10 years. And we're getting to a point now where we're seeing the type of scientific evidence that shows, not just an increasing levels of pro-social behaviour through engaging in compassionate activity, but also a changing of your brain, of the neuroscience of your brain through compassion. So the thing I always find with compassion is it's one of, people see it as quite finite. They're like, oh, I'm just not a very, I'm not a very compassionate person, or I am a very compassionate person. But actually, compassion, yeah, and it's not. It's a learned thing. It's a practice thing. So a bit like with something like mindfulness, which is all about training your mind to be better at being in the moment and the benefits that come from that. Compassion is very, very similar, that you can train your mind to become more compassionate, and therefore your kind of brain can grow in the parts that are adept for compassion and for pro-social behaviour and for emotional regulation and for developing, deeper connections with people. All of those things can be developed. So anyone who's kind of feeling like, oh, I'm a kind of shy person, or I'm not very good at engaging with people in that way, or it's just not my natural tendency, there is an opportunity there to learn this. And that's, I suppose, where it comes into the classroom, is that we have this opportunity to offer this training to children. And this type of research started I think 20 years ago at Stanford, where they started compassion. Well, they have a program now called compassion cultivation training, and it was started in a medical school. And the idea was that lots of medical staff are amazingly trained at this fantastic Ivy League university, but many of them were lacking compassion for the people they were treating, because of the nature, often, especially of some elements of medical practice, meant that detachment was required for them to be able to undertake that work, such as being a surgeon or doing emergency work. You had to focus on the job at hand. But actually, for some practitioners, being compassionate was really important, and there was an element missing. Many people get into this type of work because they are motivated by altruism. And then if you take the compassionate part away, there's a real dissonance between what they're hoping to achieve in their career. And so there's a self-satisfaction issue, and then there's also a patient care issue. So this work was undertaken, and it was found through this compassion cultivation training that they could work with medical students and actually, pre and post testing, show that they could improve their disposition and compassionate skills, and it impact in the longer term on their ability to be compassionate and their disposition to be compassionate to others, which is incredible. And it's really over the last 3 or 4 years that several groups around the world have started to put this into an educational context, including us, in various lenses. So, for instance, there's Compassion in Schools, which is based on compassion-focused therapy, which is another movement in this country. There's SE Learning, which is based in Atlanta in Georgia in the US.
Social emotional learning?
Yeah.
It's very, very big in the States.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly. And you've had those programs for years.
Yeah.
And they developed a program specifically around compassion and ethics, similar to what we do here, and we work in partnership with them. And then we have what we are doing, again, which is taking lots of the principles of SEL, which is, a fantastic program to have so widespread and have a in-depth evidence base for. We just don't have that in this country. And the time, I suppose, for me is it's very right for us to begin to address this, because I think we're beginning to put some fantastic things in place, like having conversations about male suicide rates, raising awareness with children of various mental challenges they might come across in their life. And also, we have some fantastic people offering really targeted services to children who are vulnerable in this country, although really not enough that are publicly available. But what is missing is the type of SEL, social-emotional learning, education opportunity which is available in the US, and that's something that's, universal and foundational. So it's not just having these targeted service, not just having an awareness raising, but having an opportunity for children to explore and develop emotional literacy and emotional skills at a really early point in their education, and that to be carried on through so they've got continued practice. And compassion definitely has a role to play in that. And I always think of it like a pyramid. If you've got that at the bottom of the pyramid, you'll move through life, but if you've got those foundational skills there, maybe awareness is the next, and then you've got, you might reach a point in your life where you need that targeted intervention. You might need to see a counsellor, or you might need to do some cognitive behavioural therapy, or You might need to go and see psychiatric care. But if you look back and you've got that foundation there, you're going to be in a much better position when you're facing your challenges, or you reach that stage, because you've persisted, and your school hopefully has persisted with you undertaking that type of education.
You were talking about the importance of laying the foundation so that all students can have this foundation of security and stability when that inevitable wave hits them. And I'm also thinking of another example from back when I was a deputy head, which was I would have these technology companies kind of knocking on my door saying, hey, we've got this great technological program to help increase the collaboration, the communication, to help make your students connect closer with each other in your primary school classroom. And in the back of my head, I would always think to myself, but why do I need that? Like, why spend money on a technology when really these are the primary years, and what's most important is getting these kids to learn how to relate to each other on a very human-to-human level. So both those examples I was thinking about as you were speaking about the importance of laying this foundation of building compassion. And I want to get back to your definition of compassion, because I think about the word empathy a lot when I think about the word compassion. Okay? And I think about empathy as stepping into somebody else's shoes. It's Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird saying you can't know what it's like to be somebody until you step into their shoes. You walk around in them a little bit. And yet, your definition of compassion is the idea of being open and feeling the hardship of another person. So would you agree that the definition, the nuance between being compassionate and being empathetic is that?
Yeah, definitely. They're very distinct things. And again, my colleague Alex would be able to offer. He's an ethicist, so he'd be able to offer you a laser sharp definition. But my understanding, and for my exploration of compassion, is that it's you don't have to step into someone else's shoes, because naturally, as a human being, if you see someone else suffering, you feel it. You don't have to go through that process. It's there in front of you. But there are lots of other things that underpin compassion as well. And I think empathy plays a role. Things like justice, like a feeling of wanting to make something better which is wrong. That is fundamental for compassion. Like courage. So I was speaking to teachers the other week, and I was saying one of the really fun, I was chatting to someone from the States, a doctor there who's worked on compassion for years, and he thinks courage is the key component of compassion. It's the most important part, because unless you're willing to take that action, your compassion is wasted. You might feel just feeling sorry for someone. You're looking at their suffering and going, that's really, really sad. But unless you take this step, and courage, having the courage to sometimes step outside the social norm, and again, taking that back to the classroom, how difficult within the structures and the systems of our education sector is it sometimes to step outside the norm. You might see a child or another teacher suffering, and it might be a major, something really major and profound, or it might be something quite minor but that has repercussions. But going, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make sure that person's okay, or I'm going to stop this. My goodness, that is a profound thing to do that.
And the word courage, the root of it is heart strength. Courage is the heart strength. So it fits so much, because it's not just, as you said, oh, this person, I feel sad for this person. It's, I'm going to lean forward. I'm going to break this fourth wall and very possibly connect with this person. Or, right? Is that the difference?
Well, my colleague Brendan would say compassion is fierce, which I love.
Oh, I do
love that.
I do too.
Because it requires you sometimes, the thing I often find with compassion is that people think it's about kindness, which is, and kindness is a wonderful thing. Like bringing, I came in here and someone made me a cup of tea, which was extremely kind, and I very much appreciate that, because it's very cold outside. I've walked 20 minutes to get out, and I was freezing, so a cup of tea is a salve, so thank you.
In a lovely mug too.
And but kindness alone isn't enough. I think there's a depth that comes from compassion, and courage is part of that. And sometimes that courage has to be fierce. You have to put something else aside, or really push back on someone, and that's can be difficult to judge and emotional, but really, really important, because if you think of some of the people who have been most inspiring in society, they're people who've, had that compassion, but been willing to be fierce about it, even sometimes in a passive way, if you know what I mean. So someone like Nelson Mandela was a fierce advocate for what he was wanting to do in his life, but but at the same time he showed that fierceness in a compassionate way, in a way that was him sticking to his guns, being resolute. That was how he made his fierceness shown, and that's, I think, amazing.
I love that. I love that so much. This great example of Nelson Mandela. And I'm bringing it back to the classroom. What's one thing, or what's a piece of advice if you were to be able to, negotiate with Ofsted, right, which is like basically the Department of Education over here in the UK, and say, look, every teacher needs the ability in the classroom to do X in order to create an ethos of compassion. Think for a second, what do you think that ingredient, that essential ingredient is, so that teachers can be fiercely compassionate and model fierce compassion for their students?
Yeah, I think I'd probably bring it back to something I brought up earlier, which is a dissonance between why teachers go into teaching and what they face in the classroom.
Let's explore that dissonance.
Yeah, so there's a huge problem in the UK with a high percentage of teachers dropping out before their third year is complete. And often that's to do with, it's put down to stress, but stress is, that's the end product. Unpack where that comes from, and a lot of the time it's down to teachers who have got into this job for very altruistic reasons, because even it might not be their prime reason, but often it's a passion reason underneath, is that they want to be able to influence children's lives and to be able to educate children and have a positive effect on their future. I think that's why 99% of teachers teach. And when they get into the classroom, they can't attend to that because there's lots of other things going on. And this is a problem which is beginning to be addressed in this country. So lots of bureaucracy. There are attempts to move a burden of bureaucracy off of teachers at the moment. But for me, what I would say is just taking the time, giving teachers the time, or teachers creating the time. And I'm seeing more and more fantastic, courageous, revolutionary teachers out there who are taking time in their day to have a moment of reflection with their class, or to think about, they might get a phrase or an image, or they might have an idea or a reading from a book, and they're just taking that time. Or even doing something like, I had the example in classroom the other day where a teacher was telling me that she got really fed up with the fact that they did lots of fundraising, and I was like, oh, and I said, but fundraising is a really nice thing to do. She said, but the children don't know what it's for. They think they just bring a pound in and like wear their jeans for the day. And she was like, so she spent the time, when they do that now, she spends 20 minutes really going in depth with the children about what they are raising funds for, and they raise funds like huge amounts of money for lots of really wonderful causes. But the children have the opportunity to explore compassion there, and the reason that they're doing this, it's not just so that they can wear their cool new t-shirts for the day. It's so that they can use some of their privilege and wealth to bring positive change to other people. And it's that kind of thing. Another example was I worked with a wonderful school in Durham in the northeast of England, and they initiated, off the back of our Compassion Project, a peer program in their school, and they work with their year sixes, who are often getting to in the UK, that's kind of 10, 11-year-olds, and they're kind of getting to the serious beginning to get into the serious end of education, and they were a bit worried about them being overpressured by exams and the more formalised nature of their education. So they set up a peer program where they actually look after, for 2 or 3 hours a week, they go into the lowest level of the school to reception with 4 or 5-year-olds, and they spend time with them, and they read with them, and they take themselves out of formalised learning for a bit of time, and they cultivate compassion. They go there and they help them do things. When they come into the school as new students, they show them around and they buddy up to them. The teachers have a really great program with examples of activities they can do together, so it's supportive. A great idea. I think there's so much opportunity. especially at primary level, to have these kind of, and there are many schools who have wonderful projects like that in their school that can make space for reflection and for practicing compassion or understanding it in greater depth. And I think, or any kind of emotional learning in depth. And I think taking the time to do that would be really, really exciting and could make a huge difference to children's lives.
I love that. I love the example of the primary school, the buddy system or the buddy, mentoring program that these kids, because the older kids in a primary school have already been there. Like they innately understand what it's like to be a student who's in reception, which in the U.S. would be pre-K, pre-kindergarten, 4 and 5 years old, and they would naturally, right, draw themselves to help those kids because they've been there, they know this. So any of these older primary students can do this, and feel like they're contributing to the ethos of the school, the positive school culture, right? All this discussion about compassion reminds me that I really wanted you to share an anecdote that you shared with us when I met you at this seminar. You gave a keynote speech about your work, right, with Compassion Matters, and you started with this story about an archaeological discovery. So I think this is a really great way, actually, to reiterate the importance, but also the time, kind of the timelessness of the value of compassion.
I mean, so I was an archaeology undergraduate. And I chose archaeology because I think my dad wasn't quite so scared about me going to university to study archaeology, because it's like a slightly more practical thing than going and doing something like art history, which he couldn't get his head around. So it was like an acceptable thing for all of us that, I'd be digging some holes and stuff as well.
And it's very appropriate that we're 3 blocks away or so from the British Museum too, right? The largest collection of artifacts.
Yeah. Yes. But it was multidisciplinary, and I found it fascinating. But it was also at the time becoming a more scientific subject, and archaeology traditionally was a kind of cultural history, so it would be about the richness of the narrative of human civilization, I suppose. But it was beginning to draw away from that a bit, and that was quite disappointing for me. But I found little stories within my studies that I found really inspiring, and one of them, which you allude to, is about a dig that happened in northern Thailand, where they discovered the body of a gentleman who was quite profoundly disabled, physically disabled, and he had a syndrome which meant that by the age of 14 he would have lost the use of basically his legs and probably half of his upper body as well. And the kind of date of this site was kind of middle to late prehistory, which we're talking about kind of hunter-gatherer people, so people who are transitioning into farming and things like that. And the kind of considered thinking is that, especially when we're kind of thinking of Darwinism and survival of the fittest and things like that, is that this person would have been left behind, and you're a burden on the community. But actually, this site and hundreds of sites in the emerging area of uncovering disability and diversity within the archaeological record is that there's lots and lots of sites where not only is there evidence of people with various disabilities living beyond their life expectancy for that time, but also really flourishing, and also when they did die, being really valued and buried in a way that showed they were highly valued members of the community. And for me, that is a demonstration of compassion in its very purest form, because that community, if we're talking very functionally, didn't have to look after that person. That person, the cost, the kind of input-output cost of looking after that person in a purely like, who makes food, who produces food type of way, which is how we think about prehistory. That person shouldn't have been looked after, but people were looking after them. And for me, compassion is the very, very core of that story, because it's about connection, it's about a feeling towards other people, of seeing that suffering, and instead of saying, no, you've got no role to play, engaging that, with that person, lessening their suffering, making them a valued, ensuring they're a valued and engaged member of the community. And for me, that was extremely powerful. It really actually played a profound role in me probably engaging in my studies in a deeper way, and enjoying my studies a lot more, because I kind of thought, well, this isn't just about pot shard number 58 in this site, or like, oh, this isotopic analysis. This is about people and the human journey and the positive potential. And I think a lot in history as well, in archaeology, the archaeological record just shows a lot of violence, and a lot of what is left, a lot of negativity is drawn from it. But actually, if you look at it in a certain lens, there are amazing moments of positivity and showing of how humans flourish, and that for me continues to be a fascination.
And there's so much hope to that example, and it's this idea of this hope that every human being, regardless of disability, regardless of ability, regardless of social, cultural context, can flourish in a compassionate society. And bringing it right back to kind of the beginning here, the classroom starts with the classroom. And if we can model this in the primary years, the elementary school years, and make this a baked-in part of the curriculum of every school, UK, US, around the world, then we can it can foster this hope that we will be bringing out of humanity our best, our better angels. Jimmy, I'm just so grateful that you were here today to speak with us about compassion and its importance. Is there any one topic that we have not addressed, or do you feel like we've kind of covered the gamut and this has been a very, very complete discussion?
No, that's fine. It's been great to kind of talk around the various issues in education. The only thing I would say is our project is free. So
that's important to say.
If part of Dalai Lama's mission is that this is available to everyone for free. So if you are interested in this and you want to find out more, come to our website compassionmatters.org. I'll put Compassion Matters into a search engine and you'll find us. And we're always happy to have discussions with schools, but the resources are there to be used. So please, get in touch and we can work together.
Jimi Slattery, Executive Director of Compassion Matters in Oxford, England. Yet you shared with me earlier. There's a school.
I may be overblown. Yeah, not in Antarctica.
Not in Antarctica. I was going to say, come on, the penguins. They can get kind of boisterous.
Compassionate penguins.
Yes, compassionate penguins. Let's get it down to Antarctica, and then you got to.
But every other
round at the deck
at the moment.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me and speaking with us today about the importance of compassion, particularly with this youngest generation. Thank you, Jimi Slattery.
You've been listening to Reach, Teach, Talk with Nat Damon. If you'd like to recommend a guest for a future episode, you can send your suggestion or questions to nat@reachacademics.com.